On February 9, 1960, a station wagon was blocking the bridge over Turkey Creek near Morrison, Colorado. A frustrated milkman, simply trying to make his deliveries, leaned on his horn in an attempt to get it to move. Angry, he got out of his truck and slammed the door, walked over to the station wagon, but it was empty. And the engine was running, the radio was playing, but the driver was nowhere to be seen. The milkman finally moved the car himself, but not before noticing a reddish-brown stain on the bridge and a hat that had fallen to the riverbank below. The milkman reported this vehicle to the police. Police quickly identified the car as belonging to Adolph Coors III, the heir to the Coors Brewing Company fortune. Coors had left his home not far from the bridge that morning and hadn't been seen since. No trace of him could be found. After the father of four was missing for 24 hours, the federal kidnapping statute allowed the FBI's Denver division to enter the case. Mary Coors, the wife of Adolph, received a typewritten note later the same day demanding a ransom of $500,000 for the return of her husband. The note read, "Mrs. Coors, your husband has been kidnapped. His car is by Turkey Creek. Call the police or the FBI. He dies. Cooperate. He lives. The ransom is $200,000 in tens and $300,000 in 20s. There will be no negotiating. Bills, used, non-consecutive, unrecorded, and unmarked. Warning, we will know if you call the police or record the serial numbers. Directions, place money, this letter, and an envelope in a suitcase or bag. Have 2 men with a car ready to make the delivery. When all is set, advertise a tractor for sale in the Denver Post, Section 69. Sign the ad, King Ranch, Fort Lupton. Wait at NA 9-4455 for instructions after the ad appears. Deliver immediately after receiving the call. Any delay will be regarded as a stall to set up a stakeout. Understand this. Adolph's life is in your hands. We have no desire to commit murder. All we want is that money. And if you follow the instructions, he will be released unharmed within 48 hours after the money is received." Today we hit the road to mountainous and sunny Denver, the city with the most breweries per capita, and we'll discuss the kidnapping, ransom, and murder of the heir of one of America's wealthiest families. In fact, the Coors family was number 81 on the Forbes list of wealthiest dynasties in 2015. The kidnapping that set off the largest FBI manhunt since the Lindbergh kidnapping in 1932. We'll discuss the origin of Coors, how it grew in popularity, the life of Adolph Coors III, and the life and death of his murderer, Joseph Corbett Jr. And as with any highway episode, we will end the episode with all the great things to see and do when you come to Denver and visit this wonderful gem of a city. Buckle up and let's hit the road on today's episode of Highway to Hell. Well, hello and welcome back to Highway to Hell. My name is monteashleymader. I'm your host. Really big thanks to everyone who listened to and shared my St. Louis episode last week. It's actually the fastest growing episode of what I've done so far, and I'm really appreciative of that. As always with these episodes, please consider liking, sharing, rating. It just helps boost the episode in playlists, and it's free for you. For those of you that are new to Highway to Hell, this is a travel and true crime podcast. I'm going to talk about a different city every week, one of their famous true crime or paranormal stories, and then I'm going to give you travel recommendations. And this particular episode is going to be a little bit long. I found this story and it's so well documented. I mean, I was able to read crime reports, FBI documents, it was so interesting. So we're really going to deep dive into this one, as well as I'm going to give you a lot of kind of what happened to me in Denver. Nothing about the city of Denver at all, but it was literally chaos the entire time I was there. I don't know if it's because Mercury's in Gatorade or retrograde or whatever it is, but it was nutty. It was nutty. In fact, the clothes that I'm wearing right now are part of the story. So we're going to do that. But first, we're going to start with the history of the Coors Brewing Company. We're going to talk about the kidnapping and murder of Adolph Coors III, and also really deep dive into the life of his killer, Joseph Corbett Jr. Let's get on the road and get on the highway. Coors Brewing Company was founded in 1873 by Adolph Joseph Hermann Coors after emigrating to the U.S. from Prussia. Prussia didn't become Germany until 1871. In the wake of increasing political unrest and violence in Prussia, Coors, like many others, left to seek their fortunes in America. As an orphan since the age of 15, Adolph worked multiple jobs, hoping to find a career, and discovered that it was his job at a brewery that he loved the most. In 1868, with 17 cents in his pocket, which is the equivalent of $3.71 today, he stowed away on a ship leaving Europe and headed to New York Harbor. When stopped by officials in New York, he convinced them, "Give me 1 year. I'll get a job and I'll make money, and if not, you can send me back." Adolph soon joined pioneers moving west with the railroad expansion and settled in the mining town of Golden, Colorado in 1872. With the help of an investment partner, he started a brewery in 1873. He produced a light, delicious beer that was made with fresh mountain water and was able to buy out his partner by 1880. He soon got married and had 6 children who he raised with strict traditional German values. The children were taught hard work and were rigidly disciplined. The family lived quietly as their wealth grew. However, evangelical groups in the U.S. started heavily campaigning against alcohol and the evils of drinking. Coors had anticipated prohibition and had begun producing near beers to sell to dry states as one by one states made the sale of alcohol illegal, the prohibition hitting Colorado in 1916. He also moved into the production of malted milk and porcelain. To overcome the anti-German sentiment towards his family in the wake of World War I, Adolph became an outspoken patriot, statesman, and worked to overturn prohibition. It was during this point that Adolph Coors Jr., who all refer to as Junior, began to work for his father's business. Junior was reportedly a clone of his father, a hard work and a strict disciplinarian to his own children, so much to the point that his wife would keep a record of everything the kids had done wrong every week in a book called The Bad Book, and on Sundays, Junior would mete out punishment for his children's behavior. Adolph Coors Sr. died on June 5, 1929, at the age of 82 under suspicious circumstances. It is widely believed that in the wake of his struggling business, he committed suicide by jumping out of a tall building. Even in spite of prohibition, Sr. left his children $2 million in 1929, today's equivalent of $36.2 million. Adolph Jr. took over the company and saw the repeal of prohibition in 1933. In an incredible tie-in to the main part of our story, in September of 1932, Jr. discovered a plot to kidnap and ransom him. In fact, he offered to allow himself to be kidnapped so that police would have a better opportunity to catch the perpetrators. As the kidnappers made their way to kidnap him, they got a flat tire, and the person who stopped to help them was a police officer. They were arrested after the officer found chains, ligatures, and a clear plan to abduct or harm someone. The family responded to this by becoming more reclusive and withdrawn from the public eye. While the company quietly navigated the Depression, Adolph III, our main character, prepared to join the business. His brothers Bill and Joe were sent out east to attend Ivy League schools, working briefly for DuPont before joining the family business. The Coors Brewing Company began to invest in mountainscape advertisements, overcame labor strikes, and was set to continue amassing a fortune even in the wake of World War II. And if you're watching this on YouTube, my co-host today is Cheddar, who I decided he could be featured on the show provided he didn't get too noisy, and so far he's just been sitting in the ring light enjoying himself. And moving forward in the episode, all of the Coors heirs have the exact same name. So where we're at right now, Adolph Coors Sr. has died. Adolph Coors Jr. is still alive. I'll refer to him as Mr. Coors moving forward. And then Adolph Coors III, who's our main character, I'll refer to as Ad, because that's what most people called him. Adolph Coors III, or Ad, was born on January 12, 1915, to Adolph Coors Jr. and his wife, Alice May Coors. Not much is known about his childhood, but he attended Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire before graduating from Cornell University. He was groomed from birth to take over the family business. In 1940, he married Mary Grant, a Denver socialite, and they had 4 children together. He was well liked in the Coors Brewing Company and was known to be a modest, friendly, and hardworking man. But let's talk about the villain in our story. Joseph Corbett Jr. was born on October 25, 1928, which, if you listened to the St. Louis episode last week, is the same birthday as serial killer Maury Travis. Different years, but same day. He was born in Seattle and by all accounts had a normal childhood, except for the fact that he had an older brother who died in 1927 at the age of 6. The little boy had run into the street to catch a ball and was hit by oncoming traffic, which immediately made me think of Pet Sematary. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I read that. I was like, wait, what? Oh my God. I need to watch that again. Anyways, The weird part about this is to me so strange. So Joseph was born 20 months after his older brother died, and they named him after his brother. So him and his older brother have the same name. They just use the name again. And again, in this story, so all the Coors heirs have the same name, which, this is just my opinion. Don't send me a nasty email. I think it is the height of arrogance to name your child your exact same name. And especially because, one, why can't your child be their own person? Like, just let them have their own legacy. But also, and I'm a woman, so my perspective is a little different. Your wife goes through pregnancy and labor, maybe almost dies. And your first thought is, you know what? We should name him after me. That's crazy to me. But to name your second son after your dead son is super strange. And it makes me wonder if growing up, he never really felt like a person, but he felt like a replacement child for his older brother, because that's just so strange to me. And while Joseph's upbringing seems to lack any kind of indication that he would be prone to criminal behavior, there was no abuse. His father was an alcoholic, but not abusive, and his mother was considered strange, but loving. Joseph was incredibly brilliant with an IQ of 148 and was an avid reader. He received straight A's at Bryant Elementary School, graduated with high marks from Roosevelt High School, and entered the University of Washington, scoring 91 out of 99 on his entrance exam when the average score was 50. He set his sights on medical school, specifically at the University of California, Berkeley. However, on June 7th of 1949, Corbett's mother, Marion, fell from a balcony where the railing had been removed, and she died from her injuries a few days later. Corbett was unable to cope with the death of his mother and dropped out of college shortly after. This decision was the beginning of a downhill slide for Corbett. On December 21st of 1950, Corbett attempted to rob young Sergeant Alan Lee Reed, who was hitchhiking near Hamilton Air Force Base, and when the robbery went awry, he shot the man twice and killed him. He was quickly arrested and charged with second-degree murder with a plea deal. He would spend a year in San Quentin, 3 years in Soledad, and Terminal Island. After gaining the warden's trust, he was transferred to a minimum security prison where he soon escaped and fled to Colorado in November of 1955. After escaping Chino, Corbett had robbed a supermarket of $700, but was struggling to come into money without a job in Colorado. Because of his record, he was forced to work dead-end jobs, and he deeply resented minimum wage that he worked and working around men who never read anything but the sports page or girly magazines. He contemplated robbing a liquor store and even plotted to rob a bank, but decided that the $5,000 to $10,000 he would net wasn't a big enough payday. He needed a big score, hundreds of thousands to maybe millions. And who better to target than the richest family in Colorado? He purchased a Smith & Wesson K32 Masterpiece revolver and spent 2.5 years working on a plan. On February 7th of 1960, it was a dreary, cold Sunday, but Ad Coors was still outside riding with his 16-year-old daughter Cecily, reminding her to tighten her front cinch and admiring the land around him. It was Ad Coors' second full year as a part-time rancher, in addition to running the family business. In 1956, he had convinced his wife Mary, who had always lived in the more luxurious areas of Denver, to agree to a purchase of 480 acres south of Morrison, Colorado, and to build a house there. Their agreement was this: Ad would select the design of the exterior, but the interior was completely at his wife's discretion. Ad was his happiest in the rugged outdoors. In his 40s, he had the physique of a much younger man and exercised every day and hiked frequently. His 4 children, Brooke 18, Cecily 16, Adolph Coors IV 14, and James 10, also kept him busy with activities. Cecily finally spoke up during the ride. "Look, Daddy, there's that car again. I saw it in the living room window. It's been there for like an hour." Brooke saw it too. She pointed to a car with just a driver, a man wearing a brown hat and dark glasses. Mary had also pointed out this car. She and the maid, Thelma Kaufman, had both seen the same car several times. It was really unusual for a car to be parked on an isolated country road. Ad became suspicious and thought it might be a would-be poacher or a thief. But no sooner had they spurred their horses toward the car than it took off quickly down the wet gravel road. When they returned to the barn to unsaddle the horses, Cecily mentioned the car to the ranch manager, Bill Hostler. He shook his head and looked at Ad. "I seen that same yellow car parked on the road one day last week." Ad decided he would call the sheriff if the car returned. What Ad didn't realize was that the same man had been watching them since before they moved to the ranch south of Morrison. At their old address at 840 Steel Street in Denver, the same brown hat and dark glasses had sat watching the house, but instead of in a canary yellow Mercury, he was in a 1957 two-tone white and gray Ford Fairlane. But in a bustling city, nobody noticed a man in a gray car. But on an isolated country road, any car, especially a yellow car, was noticeable. A neighbor, Virginia Massey, would later testify to the district attorney that she had also noticed the same car while coming home from her waitressing job the day before on Saturday the 6th. Voila Mears adjusted her crooked glasses as she walked through the Pearlmore apartments where she leased small apartments to tenants. She jumped when the door to 305 suddenly swung open. A tall, lanky tenant greeted her abruptly. Just as well she saw him, she'd been meaning to follow up with him. "Are you sure about giving up your parking space? I don't want to give it up to somebody else and then you change your mind." The small building only had 8 parking spaces. The tenant responded quietly, "I'm sure. I've leased a space in a garage. Have a good night." The lease listed the tenant as Walter Osborne. California prison records identified him as fugitive Joseph Corbett Jr., and the other tenants knew Walter as a quiet, clean, and honestly, completely unremarkable neighbor. He had resigned from his night job earning $110 a week as a resin cooker for Benjamin Moore and Company to pursue a new job, one that would make him comfortable, give him access to good food and luxury and exotic travel. He sat down to his old Underwood typewriter. This job required a letter, and the letter needed to be perfect, completely free of errors. And for over an hour he typed, ripped a page out, typed again, until it was clear, concise, and complete. The letter ended with, "Understand this. Adolph's life is in your hands. We have no desire to commit murder. All we want is that money." Joanne Fazelfraff, and I'm not joking, that's her name, greeted Ad Coors on the morning of Monday, February 8th, 1960. He was in the office a little bit later than usual after running errands in Denver. He shared an office with his brothers Bill and Joe, and business was always conducted together, even though Ad was technically in charge. The brothers mimicked their father, Adolph Coors II, Mr. Coors, in that everything they did was done with excellence. To be a member of the Coors family, there was an expectation of excellence in education, sporting ability for the men, and physical appearance. Nobody was to marry before graduating college. This rule was actually particularly serious because one of Joe's sons got married to his his college sweetheart while they were still in school, and they completely cut him off from the whole family. He's still married to her. They've been married for like 30 years, but the entire family cut him off because he got married in college instead of after college. One of the other rules was that the women were not allowed to help run the company. Despite their massive wealth and their membership in exclusive clubs, the Coors family prided themselves in keeping a humble exterior and attempting to stay out of the public eye. Their father had believed that extravagant or wild lifestyles may cause prohibition to be voted back into law, so he insisted that his family behave with excellence and never ever flaunt their wealth. Kidnapping was also a concern. 30 years prior, the son of the wealthiest man in Colorado had been kidnapped and held hostage for 2 weeks before being released after a ransom. And of course, there was the kidnapping plot against Mr. Coors himself, though kidnapping wasn't as much of a concern anymore thanks to the work of the FBI. February 9th, 1960 was the same as any other day. Ad woke up at 5:30 a.m. for his daily exercise, went outside to check the horses, pitched hay for them, brought them water, and then kissed his wife goodbye before leaving, just like he did every day at 7:55 a.m. to go to work. His usual drive was an easy 12 miles, mostly on U.S. Highway 285, but due to construction since January, Ad was forced to take a detour on a winding route that included a 4-mile gravel stretch through Turkey Creek Canyon. His travel all hummed gently as he made the last turn before hitting Turkey Creek Bridge and reconnecting to the highway. A yellow Mercury signaling engine trouble was blocking the bridge. The driver was 31-year-old Joseph Corbett Jr., who had been stalking Ad for months. The detour into the canyon gave him the chance to catch Ad alone, unarmed, and off guard. Corbett had decided that Ad was his ticket to avoid working minimum wage and making easy money. Everything had been painstakingly planned. He backed his yellow Mercury onto the bridge with handcuffs and leg irons already laid out in the back seat. In his glove box was a carefully crafted ransom note ready to be mailed later that day. All he had to do was get Ad away from his car, and in a few days, Corbett would be a very rich man. Ad pulled around the corner, approaching the bridge at 8 a.m., right on schedule. The yellow sedan blocking the bridge, hood up, apparent car trouble, and next to it the driver was a slim man with a brown hat and dark sunglasses. Ad rolled down his window and asked Corbett if he needed help. Corbett shouted back that he did. Ad stepped away from his travelall, the engine running and the radio still playing to help with what he thought was just a stranded motor vehicle. As Ad approached, Corbett drew his pistol and caught him off guard. Out of the Coors brothers, Ad was considered the friendliest and the most likable, but he was also deeply intelligent and stubborn. He was never going to put shackles on quietly and slide into the back seat. Almost instantly, Ad grabbed Corbett's hand that grasped the gun. The two men were almost exactly the same height and weight, and they struggled. Ad was able to slam Joseph against the railing and make a break for it. Corbett, enraged that his payday was literally running away, lifted the gun, fired 2 shots in Coors' back. Rosemary Stitt, who lived nearby, heard the shot and later would testify in the District Court of Colorado. First, it sounded like somebody hollered down on the bridge. I was sitting in front of the sewing machine by the window. It sounded like 1 or 2 words is all. 2 people, I think. And then I heard a noise like lightning striking a tree. It wasn't until 2.5 hours later, at 10:20, that 25-year-old milkman Dan Crocker made his way to the Turkey Creek Bridge. Trying to maintain his delivery schedule, first he tried honking at the stranded travelall that was just parked in the middle of the bridge. But when he finally approached the car, he could see it was empty. The radio was blasting, the window was down. He spent 15 minutes looking for the possible owner before sliding into the driver's seat, backing it off the bridge. When he found the car was still there after his deliveries, he drove to a nearby gas station and called Colorado State Patrol. The offices of the Coors Brewery had been buzzing since 8 a.m. Bill and Joe Coors had arrived by 8:15, but there wasn't any concern about Ad. He'd been late before, and although he usually called the secretary if he was, it wasn't unheard for him not to. And as Bill and Joe held off calls in order to have a 10:30 meeting with Ad to discuss the labor strike, Ad's absence became more and more noticeable. The sons were given operational authority over the brewery, but were required to make decisions in unison, and their father still maintained veto power. All the brothers had to agree, or a decision was out. It was unanimous, or it was nothing. The brothers waited until 10:45 before Bill spoke up. "Joanne, ring Ad at home and see what's holding him up. Tell him that we're going to start without him." Mary answered the phone and informed Joanne that Ad had left at 8. He should be there. But sometimes he had stops to make. Maybe it took longer than planned. Joanne offered to check the warehouse and the porcelain facilities to see if he stopped by. She asked, "Is there any place else that I should call that you can think of?" Anxiety was now traceable in Mary's voice as she thought of places he may be. Joanne was now worrying, too. She knew Ad, and it was very unlike him to forget to call and tell his brothers he wasn't coming in. Joanne called the warehouses in Denver and checked with the brewery departments. Nothing. Nobody had seen Ad. Another hour passed. Joanne pulled out the phone book and began calling hospitals and doctor's office. It was clear now that something was wrong. She was still calling when Jack Scanlon from Coors Traffic Department called her. He told her shortly, "Tell Bill I'm on the way up to the office." Jack rushed up to the office and informed Bill that a Coors Company car belonging to Ad had been found by patrol and they needed the management to call them. Bill immediately dialed the number, and before he could say what he was calling about, he was greeted with, "The lieutenant is expecting your call. Let me transfer you." The officer explained that they had found Ad's car abandoned but in perfect working order, just no driver. The officer asked, "You know who the driver is? Was the car stolen?" There was no answers. The brothers decided to meet patrol where the car was found and see if Ad could be found. Now everyone was worried. The brothers barely spoke on the 20-minute drive on Highway 285. They met Officer Hedricks at the bridge at 12:40, and he walked them to where the milkman had moved the vehicle. Nothing was out of the ordinary. The four men split up and searched, looking for footprints or clues or maybe a body. There was nothing until Hedricks approached them with a hat that had been found earlier. Bill said quietly as he handed the hat to Joe, "This one's Ad's. It's my brother's." Hedricks asked, "Are you sure about that?" And Joe agreed, "Yeah, that's Ad's cap all right. He calls it his luck hat." The brothers didn't recognize the fedora that had been found nearby. They continued to look at the stream where Bill had found tire tracks, and there seemed to be only one explanation. Ad's been kidnapped. By 1:15 p.m., Mary Coors was brought to the bridge to meet Bill, Joe, Hedricks, and another Coors employee, Ray Frost, and Lieutenant Ray Ketcher. The county lab technician, Dale Ryder, was already taking pictures, while 2 deputy sheriffs and 4 officers continued to scour the area around the bridge. Corbett had gone to Sears and purchased a load of camping gear, planning to take Ad to a camp in an isolated spot in Denver, but the February weather in Colorado promised high winds, numbing cold, and a lot of snow. He ate lunch, dropped off his laundry, went to mail his letter, his very important, very life-changing letter, and he stretched out on his couch to relax as police called Mary Coors and the brothers together to see what had possibly happened to Ad. As the police asked Mary about the morning, they heard a shout, "Over here!" and Bill told Mary to wait in the car as they rushed over. Lieutenant Ketcher pointed, "Blood. It's here, here, and here." It looked like it had been made from drops of blood rather than a lot of blood at once, but someone was hurt. They rushed Mary home so that she wouldn't see. Adolph Herman Joseph Coors III was missing and possibly hurt. All 73 Jefferson County deputies were called in, except for the handful that remained on patrol. Colorado State patrolmen and volunteers poured in to help with the search. The sheriff, Art Wormuth, admired and famous for his courage and toughness, faced a daunting task to rescue one of the most famous men in the county. Officers continued to comb Turkey Creek Canyon, and the heads of Jeep Patrol, the Mounted Posse, and the Alpine Rescue Team were also called in. Within hours, over 150 men were scouring the wilderness. They found a pair of eyeglasses with the name of an optometrist on the inside. And when they called Dr. O.E. Maring, he said, "Yes, I made those for Ad Coors. No question about it." Mary Grant Coors paced the house, wondering why nobody had called her yet. She hated being sidelined, kept from information like she was delicate or too fragile. And yes, she had been raised in privilege, but she came from a gritty family who had helped settle Colorado. They had led the drive for statehood. Her entire family were hard-working, powerful members of the community, and like her father and brothers, Mary was intelligent, free-thinking, and a key player in helping the social status of both the Grant and the Coors families. She graduated from the exclusive Vassar College in New York and was known to enjoy the occasional cocktail, drink, and golf, something that irked Ad's father, who believed that women's focus should be obeying their husbands and raising their children. Her prowess had taken a backseat to her husband in a way, but they were deeply in love and she didn't mind it so much. But her partner of now 20 years was missing. The press caught wind of the possible kidnapping and flooded Turkey Creek Bridge and Mary's home. They tried to access the Coors Brewery, but they found their answers at the sheriff's office, where they were given an official statement from Sheriff Wormuth that Ad had been in fact kidnapped, but there had not been any calls or ransom notes. Wormuth also finished speaking to reporters when his secretary leaned in to inform him that the FBI was on the phone. Scott Werner, special agent in charge of the Denver field office, introduced himself and let Wormuth know that after 24 hours, they could assume that Ad had been taken across state lines and joined the search. They preemptively had blood samples sent to the FBI offices in Washington. Around 4:30, more blood was found on Kipling Street, south of Bear Creek School. Blood, lots of blood, but no body. Mary was filled with dread as her children were brought home from school. She met them as they entered and tried to reassure them. "I have something to tell you. Now listen, it's going to be okay. Everything will be okay. It's just something we have to go through for a few days, and everything will be back to normal." Brooke, 18, spoke up. "What is it, Mama?" "Your father's missing." The children were sent to their grandparents' house to avoid the police and the eyes of the press. Brooke continued to press. As the kids were being ushered out the door, she asked her mother if her dad was going to be okay. Mary answered truthfully, "I hope so, honey. But we may never see your father again. We have to be prepared just in case. He might be, your father may be." And Mary lost consciousness. And we're going to take this moment for our mid-show sponsor break. This episode is brought to you by Intravenous Solutions, Nashville's premier IV therapy and wellness center. IV therapy can help you recover quicker from heavy workouts or illness, treat the symptoms of dehydration, and improve sleep, and give you a healthy, glowing skin. Being on stage several times a week, I can say that IV treatments keep me on my feet and are an absolute lifesaver. Dr. Allen and his staff are so kind and knowledgeable and make sure that every appointment is welcoming and easy. They also offer vitamin shots, oxygen therapy, Botox filler, weight management, and mobile services. With 4 locations in Nashville, Hendersonville, Franklin, and now their brand new location on 2nd Avenue in the Bankers Alley Hotel by Hilton, it is easy to get high-quality care all week. So come party in Nashville, beat the hangover at Intravenous Solutions. Give the code MONTY10 at checkout for a 10% discount on services. This episode is also brought to you by Nashville for Nobodies. It is a local Nashville podcast hosted by Bobby Gordon and my very, very dear friend Kyle Thurkey, and they discuss the Nashville music scene, the ins and outs of Lower Broadway, the lives of active musicians in the Nashville area, and what it means to make a living in Nashville doing music. Nashville for Nobodies interviews local touring and studio musicians, as well as other music industry professionals. If you'd like to hear my interview, you can find that in Season 2, Episode 11. Now let's get back to our show. Corbett's apartment door slammed behind him. He quickly stripped and crammed his clothes into a bag and showered. Things were falling apart. How could law enforcement know already? He tried to calm himself on the couch. It was too late for the evening news on the TV, so he reached for his radio. It crackled to life with the announcement. FBI agent in charge, Scott Weiner, says that FBI will enter the case in the morning. Corbett turned it off and looked out the window. He sat down trying to sip a beer before standing suddenly and going to the kitchen to retrieve his gun. He could smell the gunpowder, so he sat down and obsessively started cleaning it. His plan was completely unraveling, and so was he. He looked out the window again. There was a man sitting in his car. Was he there before? Corbett packed a suitcase and began throwing out all of his food. He checked the window again. That car was still there. He ran through the apartment trying to wipe his prints off door handles and levers. He looked again. The car had moved parking spaces but was still there. Why would someone do that? It had to be a stakeout. He had to get out. The headlines the morning of Wednesday, February 10th, screamed across local papers. Adolph Coors III feared kidnapped. The entire community was stunned. The Coors were not only lifelong residents, but they were friends and one of the largest employers. Who would do such a thing? And how? Weren't the wealthy and the elite protected? Some speculated it could be linked to the labor strikes at the brewery, but Ad had been well loved and this was dismissed. Also that morning, the FBI officially was on the case. The case was now named Kidnapping. FBI agents arrived in unmarked cars and another 50 officers from the FBI Western Kidnapping Squad. Hoover himself had declared this case a top priority and had given Mr. Coors, Ad's father, his own personal assurance. Interesting, the justice that money can buy you. While the search yielded no new evidence, the FBI canvassed nearby neighbors for any clues, anything that could be seen or heard. There was no new evidence, until they met with Mary. Mary held a ransom note in her hands. She read it out loud to the agents in her living room. She was terrified of that letter, but she was relieved to know that Ad was alive. The FBI agents were quiet, and she turned to Bill and Joe. We've got to get the money ready. Donald Hofstetter, agent in charge from Detroit, who was head of the Western Kidnapping Squad, asked to see the letter. He held a copy of the letter. The original had already been sent to the FBI lab. You're correct, Mrs. Coors. Your family should begin making arrangements to obtain the money immediately. We will assist you and your bank in coordinating the selection of denominations and recording the serial numbers. I'll have 2 agents make the delivery. We don't want anyone else in harm's way. FBI immediately began pooling money, recording serial numbers, deciding that 2 agents who looked like the Coors brothers, Bill and Joe, would make the drop. Because the letter had been delivered before the news of the kidnapping made headlines, law enforcement assumed it had to be the real killer. Mary protested that the letter said not to involve police, not to mark the bills, but the FBI assured her that this could be done without detection. When Coors Sr. and his wife arrived, returning from vacation, they agreed with the FBI's plan. The FBI chief followed the instructions in the note to place a classified ad in the paper that the money was ready. They had 2 agents with kidnapping experience who were prepared to make the drop as soon as a place was arranged. Mr. Coors sent Mary from the room and addressed the FBI agents harshly about whether his son was alive or dead. Though they could not determine whose blood had been found on the bridge, whoever it was wouldn't have survived long without medical intervention. Coors was stoic for a moment and then said, "Look, it's simple. I want my son if he's alive. If he's dead, I want his body, and I want his murderers executed. And if you have to give them the money, I want every penny of it back." The response to the ransom note that was put in the paper said, John Deere, 1957, model 82069. Tractor for sale, King Ranch, Fort Lupton, Colorado. And they waited. Witnesses near the bridge were finally able to give agents a lead. Several had identified the suspicious vehicle as a yellow Mercury, and they were able to get a partial license plate AT-62. Only 4 Mercuries were registered that started with that number. They just needed to find the yellow one. They ruled out cars parked at the addresses of Clarence Gade, Vance Johnson, and Claire Guthrie Trailer. That left one, belonging to a Walter Osborne. When they accessed his apartment, they could find no hard evidence except for one single fingerprint on a Benjamin Moore paint bucket. It was immediately flown to the FBI, and in 3 weeks, the headquarters would have a match. On Sunday, February 14th, a call came in at 10:30 p.m. Agents flipped on recorders and contacted the Golden Telephone Company to trace the call. "Hello," Mary Coors said softly, looking at Bill and Joe. Is this Mrs. Coors? Mrs. Adolph Coors III, said a serious voice. Yes, it is. Don't say anything, just listen. I've got your husband, don't you dare try to find him. Only I know where he's hidden, and if you ever want to see him again, you'll do what I say. Is he okay? Is he hurt? Can I talk to him? Mary asked frantically. I said don't talk. Your husband's fine, for now. So listen carefully, I want $60,000. Old bills, all 20s. Put the money in a briefcase and leave it in the back porch of the old sawmill half a mile out of town on Tuesday, midnight. Don't tell the coppers or else. Understand? You say you want $60,000. That's what I said. Use $20 bills. $60,000? Your letter said $500,000. An agent stood and shook his head. There was a short pause. Hello? Mary said. Sure I did. This is only the first installment. And on second thought, forget the installments. Let's stick to the original plan. I want the full $500,000 put in a briefcase and left at the old sawmill. You have until Tuesday midnight. No tricks. There was a click, and the line hummed. Hello? Mary looked at the agents. I'm sorry, Mrs. Coors, said an agent, clicking off the recorder. It's just a piggyback kidnapper who learned about the kidnapping in the news. A con artist trying to extort money out of you. I'm sorry. We have to keep waiting till the real kidnappers call. But there were no other calls that night. Joseph Corbett, a.k.a. Walter Osborne, had already fled the state. By February 17th, he parked the yellow Mercury in a garage in Atlantic City, New Jersey, took off the license plate before dousing the vehicle in gasoline, lighting a match, and running away. He was far away by the time it exploded. Firefighters responding to the demolished car were able to identify the serial number and that it was registered in Colorado to a Walter Osborne. When they realized he was wanted in connection with a kidnapping, they called the FBI. They were able to match his fingerprints to the car, and although he thought he was getting rid of all the evidence, all he did was draw the weight of law enforcement to his new hideout. It didn't matter, though. The FBI had their suspect, but by the time they realized he was on the East Coast, Corbett was kicking snow off his boots in Toronto. As March approached, he was getting so confident of his success that he didn't even bother changing his alias or his appearance. The memorandum dated March 5th was sent to the Denver team heading up the Cornap case. FBI headquarters had found a match to the fingerprint. Special Agent Scott Werner scanned the document and cursed. He said, "This son of a bitch may have gotten the jump on us, but it's a long race, and like every two-bit criminal who thinks he's got it all figured out, he will never get away. You know why that is, Agent?" The young agent who had delivered the memo froze. The FBI, sir?" "You're damn right, the FBI. Now get me the district attorney on the phone and let's catch the son of a bitch." The notice from the FBI that took print from a Colorado's driver's license, the home of Walter Osborne, and discovered that he was really Joseph R. Corbett Jr., murderer and California fugitive A17293. And it is interesting, as I'm reading this, and this is the 60s, how easy it was to fake your identity back then. Like now, erasing your footprint completely is next to impossible between just the internet, how we document things. But back then, there's no internet, there's no computers, there's no databases. You can just show up somewhere and just be like, this is who I am. You can go to the DMV and say, I lost my license. You can get a new one. 10 days later, Corbett was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, distributed nationwide and in Canada and Mexico. He was the 127th criminal to make the list. The average criminal is apprehended within 178 days of hitting this list. The first 1.5 million flyers were posted by law enforcement and in post offices, train and bus stations, mission homes, and businesses. J. Edgar Hoover also made a statement. "Mankind knows no crime as base and vicious as kidnapping. It is an offense all the more savage because it pits brute force against the innocent, the unsuspecting, and the helpless." Corbett was now the most wanted man since John Dillinger. March 30th, residents of Colorado woke up to the headline, "Escaped killer sought as top Coors suspect. FBI seeking fugitive in Coors case. Suspect is unknown to the Coors family." They definitely had longer headlines back then. The FBI spent the next several months pursuing sightings and aliases of Corbett. They were even able to trace his purchase of the exact typewriter that wrote the ransom letter. But no Corbett. They were on the trail but far behind him. Ad or his body hadn't been found either. On a beautiful day in September, Edward Green went to the woods for some target shooting, hiking, and solitude. He stopped at a private dump to pick up some bottles to shoot and saw a pair of newish-looking pants. He pocketed the 43 cents on the inside and searched the pockets. There was a silver penknife that made him freeze. He dropped the pants and ran to the house of his friend who was a police officer. The penknife had the initials AC3. The officer called the FBI. Within hours, agents were scouring the dump and they found a dress shirt, tie, pants, and then bones. The coroner would later report that the scapula showed the body had been shot twice in the back. And then they found the skull. Dr. Arthur G. Kelly, who had been Ad's dentist for 20 years, identified the skull. "It's an out-and-out match," he declared. "Are you sure?" said Sheriff Hammond. 100% sure. "This is the skull of Adolph Coors III." In Toronto, Corbett grabbed the paper on the way to work before hopping quickly on a bus. As he sat down and got comfortable, he opened the paper and panicked. "Have you seen this man?" The headline said in large bold letters. Corbett saw his own photograph staring back at him. He hadn't changed his appearance at all. Same haircut, same glasses, no facial hair. Sometimes he uses the name Walter Osborne, William Chiffins, and James Barron. Corbin was still using the name Walter Osborne in Toronto. He'd signed the application for his apartment under that name. He used that name at his warehouse job. He wouldn't be going to work today. He had to leave Toronto immediately. Corbett pulled the string to get off the bus. He had to leave now. He fled to Winnipeg and then Vancouver. On October 25th of 1960, a man spoke to a Toronto police officer. He had worked with Corbett under the name of Walter Osborne that summer. Canada's Reader's Digest had just released an article on Corbett along with a large photo. The FBI immediately traveled to Toronto and found his employee records and that he had inexplicably used his real address. When Corbett quickly exited the Toronto bus and fled to Winnipeg, he had abandoned more than he had at the Pearlmore Apartments in Denver. A wallet with his Colorado driver's license, his California union card, Colorado hunting license, Denver library card, Social Security card, and a pass to enter the Benjamin Moore factory. A 4-foot length chain similar to that found at the Denver apartment, several magazines that included American Crime Pulp, True Detective, and a large stack of paperback books such as Teach Yourself Flying, Teach Yourself Spanish, and ironically, the bestseller, Anatomy of a Murder. The FBI realized that by leaving behind so many personal effects, Corbett had been in a hurry and he was becoming careless. Before the FBI could write a report on the evidence left at the Toronto roaming house, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police relayed a call they'd received from a manager of Corbett's rooming house in Winnipeg. He had also failed to return a car that he had rented. It was a 1960 red Pontiac convertible. The man who called in said, "I read the Reader's Digest about that man, Joseph Corbett Jr. I am absolutely sure he roomed here last month, but he said his name was Ian McIntosh." It obviously seemed that the Reader's Digest was not only popular in Canada, but it was shortening the trail. On October 29th of 1960, Vancouver police were notified that they were looking for a 1960 red Pontiac convertible. Jack Marshall, a local constable, knew he had seen that exact car parked in front of the Maxine Motel. A quick conversation with the landlady showed that Corbett was living there under a new alias, but he had still failed to change his appearance. He matched the photo exactly. Marshall stopped the landlady from ringing Corbett to speak with him. He directed her to go to the basement, he said, "Don't say a thing, not a word. This man is dangerous. Don't do a thing until I come back." He then hurried to the rear of the Maxine to his patrol car. He drove to the nearest call box and telephoned the Vancouver Detective Bureau. Minutes later, Canadian detectives Sam Fowlow, Harry Gammy, and William Simmons met Marshall at the Sylvia Hotel, where Special Agents Hotstetter and Al Gunn were staying. By sheer coincidence, in a metropolitan area of more than 750,000 people, the FBI agent's hotel was only 3 blocks from the Maxine. By 9:45 a.m., Agent Gunn knocked on the door. Silence. He knocked again, and he heard a faint, "Who's there?" and the door was suddenly unbolted. Agents rushed Corbett, pinning him to the wall. As Agent Gunn slapped on handcuffs, he asked him, "Are you Joseph Corbett?" Corbett said calmly, "Yes, I'm your man. I'm not armed. I give up." After 263 long days, the man responsible for the death of Ad Coors was captured. In those 263 days, the FBI had assembled so much evidence that it filled a 5-inch thick investigation report that included guns, hand and ankle restraints, typewriters, paper, camping supplies, chains, fingerprints, cars, hats, and witnesses. But to get the death penalty in Colorado, they needed a witness to the murder or a confession. There were no witnesses, and Corbett refused to confess. No matter, the murder trial was set for March 13th, 1961. The mountain of evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution didn't rest until March 27th, 1961. The jury began deliberating at 10:45 on Tuesday, March 28th. It wasn't until 4:45 on March 29th that the jury foreman told the judge they had reached a unanimous verdict. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above-titled cause, find the defendant, Joseph Corbett, Jr., guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the information herein, and fix the penalty as imprisonment for life at hard labor in the penitentiary. Joseph Corbett, Jr. was sentenced to life in prison at Colorado's Old Max. The prison called Old Max had been built in 1871 and enlarged in the 1930s, including the addition of a gas chamber. It was not a pleasant place to spend a single night, much less your entire life. "So long, Joe," said Sheriff Wormuth. Now he would be simply known as Joe, prisoner number 33322. And unlike the minimum security prison at Chino, Corbett wouldn't be escaping from Old Max. He would get out, though. Due to his work and his exemplary behavior, Joe Corbett was released in 1979 after being the longest-serving inmate. He served one more year for a parole violation, but was released for the final time in 1980 after serving only 18 years for the murder of Adolph Coors. He was now 52. Corbett would never confess to the murder. Shockingly, he lived the rest of his life in Denver, just a few short miles from where he had killed Coors. Joseph Corbett, Jr. shot and killed for the last time on August 24, 2009. He had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and chose to end his life by suicide rather than disease. He was 82 years old. So if you would like to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the story or really get all the details, I would highly recommend reading Death of an Heir by Philip Jett. I was able to get some of the deeper details that are a little bit harder to find from his book. It was really, really interesting. So if this piques your interest, that's the book to go to. Before we get to the travel portion of today's episode, let's take a second to recap with today's highway highlights. Number 1, Adolph Coors III, the heir to the Coors Company and fortune, was kidnapped and murdered on February 9, 1960 by Joseph Corbett, Jr., an escaped murderer from California. Number 2, this kidnapping resulted in the largest FBI manhunt since the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby and involved personal involvement with Hoover himself. Number 3, Adolph Coors' body was found and identified in September of 1960, and in the 263 days it took to catch Corbett, the FBI collected the evidence to fill a file so thick it was 5 inches tall. Number 4, Corbett was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison at Old Max, but only served 18 years. Number 5, Corbett died by suicide at the age of 82 and is a free man. I really loved that story. It was so in-depth and it was so well documented. But let's get to the travel portion. So I grew up in Wyoming, and so as far as major cities, Wyoming doesn't have any. So we would spend time in either Billings, Montana or Denver. But this is the first time I've been to Denver as an adult, and it was really incredible to go back, but it is so different than I remember it when I was young. And as I go through these travel recommendations, I'm going to tell you the crazy stuff that happened on my trip out there. Do not book with a budget airline. It's not worth it, because what you save in money, you pay for in insanity. You do. And typically, the times I've been to Denver in the past few years, I'm flying in to go snowboarding with my brother. This is my first time getting to spend time there. So let's talk about travel as I take you through my journey. So I made the mistake of booking my flight with Frontier Airlines that I'd never flown with. I knew it was a budget airline, but again, it's really cheap. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I knew they would charge me for a carry-on, which is usually like $45. That's what Spirit and Allegiant charge. So the first thing that happened was that they don't charge $45. They charge $70 each way. So that's $140 to have a carry-on bag. And then they delayed my flight getting into Denver. I had a little bit of flexibility, wasn't a big deal, but they didn't give any explanation. The other thing that they'll do is that they tell you that if your flight is delayed more than 3 hours, you can call and reschedule, or not call. I'll get to that later. You can't call. But you can reach out and reschedule. So what they'll do is they'll delay your flight 2 hours and 48 minutes. So you can't do anything. But I find that I got to Denver. I got there. And what I love about Colorado in general is it's very active, it's very fit, it's very outdoorsy. There's so much access to hiking and snowboarding and fishing. It was kind of fun to go back as a tourist and see things that I've never seen before. I used the couch surfing app again to stay with a host named Paul, who was one of the greatest humans I've ever met. He's someone who him and his partner were both fabulous. Just loved the people that they were hosting, super friendly, gave tons of recommendations. It was a great experience. And actually, he lives in the building where Shirley Temple used to live. So I got to stay there. It was absolutely great. So we're going to jump into some of the best places to see in Denver. And because I had so many misadventures in Denver, I'm going to kind of tell it in the process of how everything I experienced happened. So I get there the first night, delayed. It's super late. I have personal training sessions the next morning. I open my suitcase and nothing ever leaks in my suitcase. Like I always have things in bags. Like I've never have a problem. No. Things exploded. Like my contact solution totally drained. My cellar water gone. A bottle of perfume I just bought all over. Like everything smelled like this perfume. And I'm separating my clothes, trying to figure out like what needs to be washed. And I'm going through my makeup to make sure nothing else exploded. I open my eyeliner and it explodes in my hands. I'm covered in black ink. I have the only pair of jeans that I brought are covered in black ink. My Gryffindor sweater, black ink. And I'm like, oh my God. So I had to throw away a bunch of my clothes. And then certain things that I had meant to pack weren't there. And I'm like, I have nothing to wear. And I have a couple like nicer venues I'm going to. Like I need to at least have pants, preferably a dress. And the fashion in Denver is very like, it's very artistic, very like hipster chic. And I mean that in just a descriptive way. That's not me. I am very much like a thigh-high slit and stilettos, dark makeup, high fashion, statement pieces. So I go all over Denver trying to find like a cocktail dress and I couldn't, everywhere I went, the dresses were either I'm 21 and it's my first spring break with my girlfriends in Miami, or it's I'm having work drinks with my colleagues. And I was like, neither of these work. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm wearing this denim jacket. I ended up buying like this tuxedo, like Canadian tuxedo denim vibe. And I don't ever wear denim. It's super cute though. And I just bought it and bought a cute pair of heels and it ended up working. But I spent almost the entire first day just trying to find clothes. I went to a mall for the first time since like 2015 because I shop online. So I spent most of the first day doing that. And I come back and I'm like, I have like 2.5 days to do all of the things that I'm going to be recommending for you. And it was worth it. But that was the major hiccup, part 1. So let's get into some of the places I got to see, and then I'll tell you about what else happened to me. So let's start with like the tourist must-sees. My favorite thing that I did in Denver while I was there was Meow Wolf. If you're not familiar with this, it's like an interactive, super immersive art exhibit. It started in Santa Fe, and it's a collective of artists that come and put this together. It's like walking into a fantasy realm. It is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And obviously I did it high. I took some mushrooms before I went. 10 out of 10 would recommend. It is one of the most beautiful, breathtaking things I've ever seen. In my shopping expedition, I also went to Larimer Square, which is like it's old Victorian buildings. There's really cool restaurants and boutiques. The boutiques were like a little, I wasn't going to pay $300 for a dress because I had some as soon as I get back to Nashville. So I was like, But it was really nice. It was really nice. And then if you're a beer person, there are so many breweries. I'm not really a beer person. I'll drink an IPA from time to time, but I feel like there was a brewery everywhere I looked, and they all looked amazing. So if you are a beer person, Denver is for you. This entire episode has been about beer. Also this place was magical. I'm a big reader. I'm a book nerd. Always have been. There's a place called the Tattered Cover. It's the largest and most well-known bookstore like in the US. It is massive. It is massive, and it is delightful, and it is wonderful, and it is heaven. And if you like books, you should go. You're welcome. You're welcome. I didn't expect a bookstore to really be winning it for me, but it was really, really, truly incredible. And then bars. So my brother lives close to Denver, and I wasn't able to see him, but he told me, he's like, you have to go to B&GC. And I'm like, what is that? He's like, it's a speakeasy. You have to make a reservation. So with this speakeasy, you have to make a reservation and a deposit. And they are very serious about it. If you are late, which I was the first night, they like cancel your reservation. They'll wait 10 minutes and then you're done. And they don't give you your deposit back. So the second night, I was like, I'm coming the second night. and I made a reservation again and paid the deposit. It is really cool. Like, this speakeasy is hidden. It is really hard to find, and it is amazing. The cocktails were fabulous. The waitress was the most friendly, delightful ball of light I've ever seen. Truly, truly incredible. I also would recommend going to Union Station. So if you fly into Denver, there's an AirTran that goes right to Union Station, which is so convenient and so much cheaper than taking an Uber. It's like $10 and an Uber's like $70 because the airport's a little bit away. But Union Station has a bunch of really great eateries. There's a fabulous cocktail bar on the second floor. And then if you like gin, there's a place called Ulteria that only serves gin. And I love gin. Monty on gin is a fun Monty. And then the other one, I was so glad that someone told me about this. A local told me about this. There's a place in the Brown Palace Hotel called Churchill Bar. And it's a kind of a cigar bar. But all the presidents and businessmen and dignitaries all used to stay there. This bar has a lot of history. It's really, really beautiful. And supposedly there's some hidden tunnels in the hotel or underneath the hotel that lead to the Churchill Bar that they used to bring in prostitutes for the dignitaries. I wouldn't be surprised they have that in Tennessee too. I live across from the Capitol building when I do live in Nashville, and there's tunnels to the Hermitage Hotel where they used to sneak in sex workers. But, you know, God and country. Restaurants. Snooze is the best breakfast I have ever had in my entire life. But this place fills up so fast. You need to get there early or get on the wait list. Like, this place is incredible. I cannot speak highly enough of it. My second choice was La Loma. It is some of the best Mexican food. And the tortillas are so good. I love Mexican food, so that was a big win for me. And then I didn't mean to include 2 breakfast places, but this was another one that locals had sent me to. There's a place called Sam's 3. It's like this little hole-in-the-wall restaurant. It was not only a delicious breakfast burrito, it was literally the size of my face. And I wasn't hungover, but if I was, this would be amazing, 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 amazing. Hangover food. So good. And there were so many other places that I wanted to go to. I just didn't have enough meals. I was like, I don't eat enough to do this. But, you know, please go to these places. The breakfast and the brunches are on point. And as always, you know that I'm a musician. I love music. So there's always a music focus for me in a new city. So let's talk about venues. So this one I didn't go to this trip, but I've been before. Red Rocks. Obviously, Denver is super famous for Red Rocks. It's this beautiful Red Rock outdoor amphitheater. Their first concert was actually in 1906. So if you're in Denver and there's a show, even if you don't know who the artist is, it's going to be great. Go to Red Rocks. It is so beautiful. So beautiful. But my favorites on this trip that I was able to stop by or catch a show, Mission Ballroom is a really cool, local, they feature local artists. It's very geared towards locals. The murals inside the building are all done by locals. The food and drink options are all local, and they feature a lot of up and coming Denver artists. Denver has a really cool music scene. It always has. Very much kind of geared toward, there's a really cool indie rock scene. There's a folk pop scene, the Lumineers are from Denver. And then there's a really cool metal scene. So it's just, and it's happening all the time. The other one is the Gothic Theater. It was built in 1920. It's very Art Deco. I know that the Giant Rooks are coming there next week. So if you guys happen to be in town, they're great. Go see them. But the Gothic Theater, is just, the building itself is art. And so then the shows are kind of icing on the cake on top of it. And then my last one is the Ogden Theater. So this actually used to host Harry Houdini used to host shows here. Right now they seem to have this pattern of they host an artist right before the artist makes it big. Right before Lizzo blew up, she performed at Ogden Theater, and it's been kind of a trend for them. It's a really cool place to see up and coming artists, local artists. Really fun. But there's a ton of other venues, but those are the ones that, that I stopped by or I got to see that really stood out to me. I was really busy this trip, despite the chaos. And then, so if you don't follow me on social media, it's Monty Mader on all platforms. Every week on Mondays, so the podcast episode comes out on Tuesday. I release a playlist on Mondays that features bands from the cities, famous bands, local bands, a nice little conglomerate of music. It's actually, I've been considering moving the release of the podcast to Thursdays so that the playlist can kind of savor for a second. But it's great. Anyways, so Denver has, again, like I said, a really great music scene. So Earth, Wind, and Fire's from Denver. The Lumineers are from Denver. And even though he's not from Denver, Dave Matthews really blew up in Denver. Denver was a city that was really pivotal in his career. But I'm going to talk to you through my favorite artists that I either discovered in Denver while I was there or heard about from locals, and actually one that I saw here in Nashville. My kind of favorite surprise find is an artist called Neptune. Neptune is spelt with a 3 in place of the E. It is this beautiful, gritty blues soul, gender bendy rock. It is amazing. I was so impressed. The name came up a couple times when I would talk to people. And so I just put a playlist on and I blown away. Probably my favorite pick as far as people I didn't already know of. The other band that came up a lot was the Colfax Speed Queen. It's like Cage the Elephant meets the Struts, and it's got this cool lo-fi, gritty deliciousness. And then there's Cheap Perfume, which is a female punk band. They have a song that was hilarious. It's called It's Okay to Punch Nazis. But it's very punk. So if you don't like punk, it's not going to be for you. But they are so, so good. And then as someone who loves metal, Blood Incantation is metal as fuck. They are so good. And another metal band from Denver that I actually saw in Nashville, they played with Between the Buried and Me and Trivium, I believe. But it's a band called Chemists. Metal band, amazing live performers. It's metal music that they write about wizards. It's kind of awesome. It's kind of how I want to live my life. And then a hip-hop artist that I ended up discovering is called Ace the Skywalker. His song, Captain Kirk, is really, really good. So I wanted to throw that in there as well. And that's the Denver episode, everybody. Thanks again always for listening, for joining me on the road. This trip has been really amazing. I'm super excited to go to Savannah this week. Savannah's my next stop. And please, again, feel free to post, share, rate, review. I typically on Spotify have little interactive questions you can answer at the end of each episode. My goal is just to make the episodes better and better as I go and see what people are really interested in, whether it's a crime story or a city that you want to see. And I have some special announcements coming for the podcast in the next 2 weeks. But until then, thank you so much for joining me on the road. We're going to wrap it up. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week from Savannah, Georgia.